Hey y'all, it's Olivia. Welcome back to my channel, AV Reads. Welcome if you're new. Glad that you found your way here. Today we are going to be doing a book tag. This is one of my first book tags to do. And again, I was not tagged by anyone. Today I'm doing the first time book tag, which was created by Getting Hugo with It. And then I liked it whenever she made it, which was earlier this month. And then I saw Nakia from Nakia's Hideaway do it. And then, I don't know, I think that there's good prompts in this that you wouldn't necessarily hear from other people. Like hear from people like in their normal, like talking about stuff, since it's about like the first stuff and not like necessarily like favorites or stuff that they've read recently. So I thought that I would do it because I can't imagine talking about most of these books. I can't imagine any other context that I would have talked about them. So without further ado, let's get started. The first prompt is Sorry Not Sorry, the first book that you could not stop gushing about. So for some of these, I'm like taking it all the way back to elementary school, like early reading, and then like some films more like as an adult reader. So I got like two kind of answers for this. Like my favorite ever series, whenever I was in elementary school, was Series of Unfortunate Events, and like had to be the first person to read all of them. As soon as a new one would come out, like it was very competitive, like who was going to get a hold on it at the school library. So like I remember like gushing about that one at the time. But then more as an adult, I think The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is like the book that I've like talked, really gushed about the most. Like I haven't told the story on BookTube before, but like I remember I read this book when I was 18, and like after I read it, I had a dream. I had a beautiful dream that I was at a Chili's Bar and Grill, and who was there but Toni Morrison. And I just like was able to hug Toni Morrison and tell her how much I loved her writing. And so I feel like that's the appropriate answer for this prompt, because I feel like having a dream about meeting an author at Chili's and getting to like hug them and like like having that like subconscious love for them, and very conscious love for them, but like, while you're asleep and dreaming, that's a gush. That's a gush to me. The next prompt is Thank You Next, the first book you wish you had DNF'd. Whenever I was in elementary school, in middle school, I always like was trying to read the books that were like on my brother's curriculum, because they were like about 5 years older than me. And so like anything they were reading, I was like, I loved books and I wanted to like get to those classics earlier and get to like those formative experiences earlier. And like one of my brothers had Anthem by Ayn Rand on their school list, apparently, because it was in our house. And I read this book when I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I didn't like have really any strong opinions on it at the time. But who was letting a child read Ayn Rand? So like adult Olivia wants to DNF that book for child Olivia. You should have never had to read that. I love you and I protect you. You should have never had to read Ayn Rand. That was... So I didn't want to DNF it then, but I wish that I had. Wish that I was able to protect my younger self in that way. The next prompt is Working Wonders, the first book that helped you through something hard in your life. For this one, I chose The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. It was a very special book to me whenever I was like 16 years old, just because I did have difficulty with depression whenever I was that age, which I think was more, circumstantial, just like people that were in my life. And then also, it was a time that I was like realizing that I wasn't religious anymore, which had been like so much of my identity up until that point, that I didn't really like have any like firm beliefs, which is kind of shaking to like have a belief system and then lose it, because you don't know what anything's for at that point. And since that time, I know what my life is for. But whenever you're 16, when you're a child, that's hard, as well as like coming to terms with my sexuality and just everything about being 16. So the bell jar and just like seeing like, you know, a young sad girl represented, and that was like really like the first adult book on with like mental health representation that I'd read at that point, just because you know, whenever I was young there wasn't a lot of like mental health representation, so you're like going back to older works. And so the bell jar, I loved the bell jar. The next prompt is Don't Turn Out the Lights, the first book that gave you chills. Without a doubt, the book that shook me to my core as a child, that gave me nightmares, that gave me phobias, that made it hard to walk on playgrounds, that I thought that there was a ghost girl gonna sit on every swing set, was Mary Kate and Ashley, Case of the Haunted Camp by Nina Alexander. This book was terrifying. It's about two young girls, just like I was. I was a young girl, and they're at a summer camp, and there's either a mysterious bear haunting the camp physically, or there's a ghost girl. There's a ghost girl. They thought they heard the swings going at night. That's what I remember. I was shaken to my core. I remember like I probably read this when I was like 6 or 7, and that it was like one of the first books that I remember like being a chapter book that I read in a day. Like it was like one of my first like binge reads too, but it definitely was shaking. It gave me chills. That and like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like they could really mess up a young child. The next prompt is Can I Get My Time Back Please? The first book that made you angry. This one I think made me angry, and I did DNF this just because of like the hype that was built around it. And like I would never pick up this book now, but I think I was like in my late teens or early 20s, and like had always seen this book around whenever I was younger, and it always looked cool, and it's selling something than it is, and that's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Like whenever you look at this cover, and then if you like read the book, they're not the same. They're not the same. This is selling something that the story is not delivering. And it's just so, like, I know that it's like a young adult or middle grade or whatever genre it is book, but it's so poorly written. Like you can tell that the author just like found these creepy old photos, and then like they're like randomly splattered throughout the text, and there's like a little blurb about them, and then they keep going, and it's just, I saw in my like Goodreads review that there was like jokes about like domestic abuse and stuff in it, which I don't think is necessarily appropriate for, you know, a middle grade book to just like, I don't know. That's a pass. That made me angry because it looks so cool and it's not. It's not good. It's just not a good book. Next prompt is Out of Comfort Zone. The first book that made you fall in love with a genre you'd never really explored before. And this to me is wild. I have always loved horror movies, really since I was allowed to, I'm not gonna say even allowed, since I was able to watch them like go over to people's houses. We'd never had any horror stuff at home. I always loved like Courage the Cowardly Dog and like spooky themed stuff whenever I was in elementary school and middle school. Nightmare Before Christmas stuff, but like never really saw a horror movie to my recollection until like early high school. And since that time I've loved horror movies, and like I've always loved spooky themed stuff, always loved Halloween, and I've always loved books, but I'd never read a horror book, other than maybe like trying Stephen King, until last July I read my first horror book, and now look at me. That's like half of what I read now, or more than half of what I read. But the first one that I read that really like sparked my, it was the first one I read and it did spark my love of horror, was Sour Candy by Kealan Patrick Burke. It's a short little novella about a spooky boy who changes reality, kind of inceptions his way into people's lives, and I loved it. The cover was so good. Like I think I was like scrolling through a script and I saw that cover and I was like, Okay, now that looks really cool. Why don't I read horror? And then I did, and then I loved it, and now here we are. Here we are. We're going strong. The next prompt is Mirror Image, the first book that made you feel known. I think like this prompt in some ways like probably speaks to like, you know, significant experiences that you've had or identities that you have that really make you feel known in a book. And I haven't read a ton of books with bisexual characters, honestly, which is, I guess, like what I would look for if looking for being shown representation of, you know, needing to feel known in a book. But this book, Cherry Beach by Laura McPhee-Browne, definitely made me feel known, because it's like a soft, very soft, queer, one-sided love story about, you know, like a young woman who lives in Toronto, and she lives in Vancouver. She lives in Canada. I think it's Toronto. And she's like in love with her best friend, and like it's not in like a weird way like, oh, you know, like my best friend should love me and all this, but it's just like this, you know, unreciprocated one-sided relationship. She's still like a good best friend and everything, but just like the character was so soft, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm a very soft emotional person, and I don't necessarily see really soft people being validated in books. Like everything's always about like being the strongest or the smartest or whatever, and sometimes like just like being very emotional and very affected by things. I don't think it's necessarily a bad trait to have. I've learned to love it about myself over time, to be like such an emotional sponge for other people, and everything is very affecting to me. But it's just, the story was like so soft and beautiful, and the writing is so good. This is an Australian book, and always trying to read more Australian lit. And then the last prompt is Hop Aboard the Wayback Machine, the first book you reviewed on BookTube. This is not really a Wayback Machine for me, because the first book I reviewed on BookTube was last month, June, July, and that was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by LaRocca, which yeah, I reviewed on here, loved. Go check out my review if you haven't read the book yet, which a lot of people have now. I think I read it the day after it came out, and like had the review up that week. But now a lot more people have read it and loved it, or there's really mixed opinions on it, which everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I, for one, did love it. And those are all the prompts for the first time tag. So thank you so much, April, for creating this tag. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think that, like I said earlier, there's a lot of these books on here I would have never mentioned in any other video. I would have never been able to tell you how scared that Mary-Kate and Ashley book made me. And that was really a special time for me. That was really meaningful that I was able to share that with y'all. And thank you for letting me trust you with that information. But definitely, like, if you're interested in this tag, try it out. I feel, because I'm such a soft person, I'm like scared to tag people because I don't want them to feel obligated to. But I would love to see Kat at Obscura do this tag. I would love to see Olivia at Ghoul do this tag. Really anyone, because I love like knowing what your first of everything is. Sean and Bert at Storytime, if you want to try out this tag, I would love to hear about your first. But yeah, if you do this tag, definitely leave a comment down below, or if you are going to, leave me a comment and I'll be sure to check it out. And subscribe if you want to hear more of stuff like this. If you want to, like, comment, everything. Bye-bye.